Welcome to the Nobody Knows Nothing podcast. More than a year ago, back-to-back hurricanes hit during fall season. Conspiracy theories about the government manipulating the weather are everywhere. A friend told me that I should start a podcast to, quote-unquote, talk about the crazies. And the thing is, conspiracy ideation doesn't make someone crazy. I used to believe in conspiracy theories. Now I study conspiracy theories academically as part of a larger focus on why people believe things that are not true. Within the last decade, belief in conspiracy theories has become incredibly culturally relevant. It's gone mainstream. It's also true that almost everyone believes in something without having good reasons for believing it. We don't always spend time or attention thinking about what we think we know. We're all human. We all get swamped by information overload and awareness exhaustion. It makes sense that a lot of people feel too tired to try anymore. We're all sort of navigating through the overwhelming landscape that is the modern digital information system. Sometimes it's hard to know what to believe. In this podcast series, I'd like to share what I've learned about conspiracy theories and the people who believe them. Along the way, I'll tell you my story about learning it all the hard way. The goal will be to unpack the structure of bad reasoning. I hope to talk about how people come to believe in things for bad reasons and how we can all develop better critical thinking skills and mental habits to avoid falling for incorrect information. This series won't be about debunking conspiracy theories. Directly repeating facts is not effective. Besides, there's already plenty of that out there for anyone interested enough to find it. This series will use Anthropology as a guide to examine the techniques and tactics of reason used by different cultures to justify conspiracy beliefs and anti-intellectualism through avoidance of certain types of knowledge. I hope that this series will address the historical context and the underlying structure of conspiracy theories as a social phenomenon. Why do people believe in them? There are true historical conspiracies, so what even counts as a conspiracy theory? How does conspiracy thinking overlap within larger misinformation systems, and how do people misperceive related concepts and ideas? Conspiracy thinking has surged in popularity, and I think it might be time to ask why. Conspiracy theories about weather manipulation are a great example of what I mean. History is full of fascinating examples where people believed in some unknown agent intentionally manipulating the weather. Myths from the deeper past tell us about the need to appease gods or spirits who had the power to control storms, lightning, and all sorts of other natural phenomena. The idea that the weather was the result of the whims of an entity beyond human understanding is very old. Such beliefs were common throughout most of human history. It is a consistent theme because the weather determined if the crops were productive or if a catastrophe of drought and famine might follow. In Britain, until shortly after the Second World War, it was technically illegal for anyone to predict the weather because predicting the weather was considered witchcraft. People all over the world had been recording local weather data for centuries, but the need to fly military aircraft over great distances made it necessary to understand how larger weather systems worked. After the testing of the first atomic bombs, many people across the United States told wild tales about the secretive nuclear program, including that its true intention was a weather manipulation device. We now understand that nuclear testing did affect the weather, just not in any way that the conspiracy theorist envisioned. Fun fact, Did you know that a lot of the science and technology of modern weather forecasting and advising originated from top secret military funding? A ton of the science done to study the deep ocean and upper atmosphere is the product of research that was funded by the US Navy and the US Army Air Force during the Second World War and later during the Cold War. Ironically, the military would probably love to control the weather because it would be a major advantage on the battlefield, but scientists have been, and still are, struggling to understand more about how complex Earth systems work. There are a great deal of historical reasons that might encourage an individual to believe that someone could manipulate the weather. A culture of hidden funding and secretive research with knowledge so complex in mathematics that the average person is totally out of their depth. It's the perfect background for conspiracy-type suspicion. Conspiracy theories prosper when cultures are primed to believe in background assumptions that make them possible. I grew up in a culture that was already primed for conspiracy beliefs. It was easy to believe in government corruption and secretive groups with nefarious agendas. Nixon and Watergate had tainted everyone's faith that those in charge were honest. The Iran-Contra scandal dominated the news when I was just a toddler. The American public, in general, was experiencing a slow loss of faith in institutions because of repeated cover-ups and questionable clandestine activities. Being suspicious of the official story just seemed to be prudent. My grandfather used to tell the family about seeing a triangle-shaped UFO flying around over the oil fields of North Texas. Nobody ever outright stated they didn't believe his story, but I know now that it was probably an early prototype of the Lockheed Martin F-117 Stealth Nighthawk. Growing up, the adults in our lives told us ghost stories, ridiculous claims about Bigfoot, and even stories about having seen alien aircraft. We were all pretty sure the government was covering that stuff up too. Secret groups, secret agendas, not understanding new technologies, and a decline in trust of institutions created the perfect environment for conspiracy theories to seem entirely rational for someone who grew up on the edge of nowhere. When September the 11th happened, I was in high school. Like many others, I was caught up in the national trauma, and I struggled for answers. During America's foreign wars that followed, global communications went through a revolution. The information age had been well underway since the end of the Second World War, but social media changed the nature of sharing information. Now a single person can quickly reach an audience of millions without the same labor, time, or material restrictions of the past. What was once an expensive burden, today's inexpensive technology, like cell phone cameras and user-friendly editing apps, makes manufacturing content quick and easy. New ways to network between like-minded people became available through social media. Whole new cultures and communities were developed. Ideas could now spread at the speed of thought. The internet and social media revolutionized the information landscape in ways that radio and television could never compete with. Many people, including myself, believed that these changes were good and could lead to an amazing future. I still believe that, but I think it's important to admit to ourselves some of it comes with a downside. When I was younger, I was unprepared for the painful crash course in flawed thinking that I would receive. Media made by conspiracy theorists found me on social media. It slipped into my awareness almost without my noticing or understanding. You see, I enjoy documentaries about history and nature. I find the format familiar. I enjoy a good narrator explaining something and showing me what they're talking about. Conspiracy films are often created in this style, as if they were legitimate educational programs, for that exact reason. They appeal to the curious. Films like Loose Change promoted the idea that the US government was behind the 9/11 attacks. Zeitgeist spent a third of the film attempting to debunk religion before offering its own version of the 9/11 conspiracy. Alex Jones already had an expansive catalog of full-length conspiracy videos with excellent editing and production quality by the time I entered the conspiracy culture. At the time, these types of films were exotic and unlike anything young me had ever seen before. To my naive and inexperienced younger self, it seemed as if they were confronting taboo dogmas and asking uncomfortable questions. In a way, it seemed like they were peeling back a curtain and revealing a larger reality outside of what I had known. They were offering secret knowledge that they said someone else did not want me to know. Ironically, it was conspiracy media that eventually made me start questioning my own reasoning. You see, a common trait of conspiracy theory is that it provides an alternative explanation for an event or phenomenon by claiming that someone else is misleading people or lying about something. They will insist that anyone who believes those lies is gullible or part of the conspiracy to conceal the truth of their alternative explanation. As a conspiracy theorist, I eventually asked myself, if it's true that there is a way to mislead and trick people about reality en masse, how does it work? If mass manipulation is possible, what are its methods? If there were a science of indoctrination, persuasion, or even brainwashing, what would it look like? Almost all the conspiracy theorists universally insist that this science of mass manipulation exists, but why are so few interested in discovering how or why it works? When I finally managed to dig myself out of impoverished reasoning, I never stopped asking how I'd been convinced of something without better reasons in the first place. I was angry at myself for not having been more skeptical. I wanted to know, how does someone fall into bad reasoning? Why do we have these cognitive blind spots? I went back to college to find out. There, I was taught to think like a scientist and to challenge what I thought I understood. I learned that as a conspiracy theorist, I've been asking the wrong questions in the wrong ways. In the quest for knowledge, if our biases shape the questions we ask, the answers we get might mislead us. A Google search for quote-unquote secret government weather machine will yield very different results than a more basic question like, how does the weather work? In trying to understand our complex world, we often assume that we know far more than we actually do, and that leads us to a level of certainty that is often unwarranted. How would anyone know what a secret weather machine was if they didn't understand the slightest thing about how one would work in the first place? It turns out the conspiracy theorists were right about something. There is a science of mass manipulation. It's called advertising. Most people are entirely unaware of the sophistication of the technology that is used to funnel their attention towards unsolicited messaging. When most people think of advertising, they associate it with selling products, but the same methods of persuasion are used in areas outside of marketing for visible products. Because my area of research deals with the propaganda of persuasion, it's sometimes been referred to as the study of anti-advertising. The worrying number of agencies, syndicates, and nations that use the methodologies of mass manipulation is enough to give any researcher pause. As I move further away from conspiracy thinking, the rest of the world seemed to run towards it headlong. Conspiracy theories became center stage in culture and politics. Many words have been used to describe this cultural shift that's taking place. Post-truth, alternative facts, the epistemological crisis, the age of ignorance. The general public increasingly distrust institutions of expertise. Science and scientists are treated with suspicion. Certain in-groups celebrate ignorance as a virtue. Some people have lost trust in the very idea of expertise or even the ability to search for truth itself. This has not been a natural cultural shift. It is an attack. A thorough, cross-disciplinary examination reveals that conspiracy ideation is being promoted by autocrats and oligarchs as a path to power. This is not controversial, because there's nothing historically new about it at all. The rich and the powerful have used anti-intellectualism and conspiracy thinking to disrupt societies throughout history. At times, the question of who has knowledge and who does not inevitably crosses into subjects about the levers of power. Without doubt, the question is political. Any work on the subject without addressing the nature of power through knowledge would be incomplete. Around the world, nefarious groups utilize modern technologies to strategically inject disinformation into the public perception. Ironically, conspiracy theorists are using some of the same methods of manipulation when manufacturing their media. Often the goal is not to create absolute belief, but to generate uncertainty or even avoid questioning certain facts. Their goal is the creation of ignorance about ideas. Techniques for encouraging emotional reasoning and avoiding skepticism about claims can bypass our active judgment. In this way, a successful influencer encourages believers to use flawed reasoning about specific topics habitually. Their audience can, in essence, become indoctrinated or trained to respond to opposition with calculated unthink. While this science of creating ignorance can seem complex, it often utilizes our most familiar and human instincts against us: identity, tribalism, fear, and reactionism. Weaponizing these behaviors is not new. They've been the tools of tyrants for centuries. Conspiracy theories are at the heart of authoritarian methods of political and psychological manipulation. What's new is technology like social media, algorithms, passive surveillance, and artificial intelligence that do it all so much more effectively and efficiently. It is no exaggeration to talk about the problem in dystopian terms. We're already there. The entire world is now experiencing a new and very divided era of information awareness. Rhetoric and propaganda promoting the normalization of anti-intellectualism and conspiracy ideation are the dominant cultural norm. People seem very worried about artificial intelligence, but the real threat isn't the Terminator or sentient robots, but the manufactured inability to know what's actually happening. Systems designed to generate wealth by creating ignorance are a threat to individual freedom. Not being able to share context with our neighbors about reality is now a threat to the future of the planet and all the people on it. One of our first scientists in the history of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, once said, "If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be." Blind spots in our thinking limit our horizons. They're a trap. However, the first step of avoiding a trap is being aware that there is a trap. My hopes are that this podcast can help teach people the same value I found in learning not to be satisfied with just asking questions, but to ask better questions. To study ignorance is to familiarize ourselves with the pitfalls of our own thinking. It is an exercise in humility to bring ourselves face to face with the very things that we avoid knowing. Carl Sagan once said, "Science is more than a body of knowledge. It is a way of thinking, a way of skeptically interrogating the universe with a fine understanding of human fallibility." The history of science has a lot to offer when it comes to how people have created knowledge or found ways to deny it. Mistakes from the past offer a guidepost for avoiding the same types of errors in the future. Put simply, science understood through where science went wrong is like admitting that our way out of a dark room can sometimes require us to bump into every wall, over and over, until we find a doorway. Using the history of human fallibility as our guide illuminates the power of the modern scientific method. I hope that I can share the passion that I've found for using science as a tool for asking questions about the big stuff. For anyone wanting to move away from conspiracy ideation, or even just to think more critically, the first step is simple. We must admit to ourselves that it's possible to be wrong. If we're truly interested in what is true, we cannot learn anything until we can admit to ourselves that we could personally be wrong. But it's okay to be wrong. If you think like a scientist, admitting you were wrong is exciting. You've learned something new. Sometimes we must bump into every wall until we find a doorway. In science, failure is one of the greatest teachers because failure is just as valuable as every success. You still learn from failure if you allow yourself to be honest. The next episode will focus on unpacking how science works by asking, what is skepticism? We'll examine some of the finer points of reasoning, like fallacies, and analyze what it means to ask questions scientifically. In the episode that follows, I'll attempt to create a framework for what we've learned so that the first 3 episodes can be a primer for the rest of the series. Later, I'll address what some specific examples of conspiracy ideation are and what they can teach us about bad reasoning. If you like what I do here, consider contributing to my coffee and book addiction at www.gofundme.com/u/nobody knows nothing podcast. Thank you to anyone who is listening.